You know, they say you can tell a lot about a person by how they treat someone who can do absolutely nothing for them. And if that's the metric we are using, then Evelyn Sterling failed the test so hard she practically set the curve for cruelty on a rainy Tuesday morning in downtown Seattle. I want you to picture the lobby of Sterling Global, this cathedral of glass and steel that smells like money and aggressive air conditioning, a place where the silence is heavy and expensive, and right in the middle of that polished marble floor was Julian Hayes, a man who had spent the last 3 years learning the art of becoming invisible. Julian was 39, but if you looked close enough at the grey in his beard and the permanent groove of exhaustion between his eyebrows, you'd swear he was 50. He was pushing a heavy industrial cleaning cart, the wheels squeaking a rhythmic, annoying protest that echoed off the high ceilings, moving with the muscle memory of a man who used to design propulsion systems for aerospace jets before life decided to take a baseball bat to his knees. See, 3 years ago, Julian wasn't mopping floors, he was leading a team of engineers, he had a house with a mortgage he could afford, a wife named Sarah who made the best peach cobbler in the state, and a 4-year-old daughter named Maya who thought he hung the moon. But then cancer came knocking, and it didn't care about his degree or his plans, it just ate through their savings, their insurance, and eventually, it took Sarah, leaving Julian with a mountain of debt that looked more like a phone number and a little girl who needed health insurance more than she needed a dad with a fancy title. So he took the job at Sterling Global because, ironically, the janitorial union had better benefits for dependents than his contract engineering gig did, and that's how he found himself blocking the path of Evelyn Sterling, the CEO, the ice queen of the Pacific Northwest, a woman who wore power like a weapon and treated empathy like an inefficiency. The elevator chimed, a rich, golden sound, and out she stepped, flanked by 3 investors from Tokyo who were hanging on her every word. She was looking at her phone, checking stock prices or maybe just admiring her own reflection, and she didn't see Julian, or maybe she did see him but registered him as furniture, as an obstacle, because she kept walking until she nearly collided with his mop bucket. Julian reacted fast, pulling the cart back. "Apologies," he said, his voice low, his eyes fixed on the floor because he knew the rules of this game. But Evelyn stopped, and when Evelyn stopped, the whole lobby stopped, the air grew thin, and she looked at him with an expression that wasn't anger, it was worse, it was total, utter disdain. "Do you have any idea," she said, her voice cutting through the lobby like a scalpel through silk, "how much these investors' time is worth per second?" Julian gripped the handle of his cart, his knuckles turning the color of ash. "I was just trying to get the scuff marks out before the morning rush, Miss Sterling." "I don't pay you to try," she snapped, stepping around him as if he were a puddle of something foul. "I pay you to be unseen. If you can't manage the simple task of invisibility, I suggest you find a job where your incompetence is less conspicuous." She didn't wait for a response, she just clicked her heels and walked away, her entourage trailing behind her, leaving Julian standing there in the middle of the lobby, a grown man, a father, a genius engineer, reduced to a stain on the floor by a woman who didn't even know his name. He didn't say a word, he didn't throw the mop, he didn't quit, he just swallowed the bitter pill of pride because he had a picture of Maya in his wallet and she needed her asthma inhalers. So he finished his shift, clocked out, and walked 3 blocks to the bus stop, letting the rain wash away the heat of humiliation that was burning his neck. That afternoon was supposed to be routine, a half-day he'd requested 2 weeks in advance so he could take Maya to the specialist at St. Jude's for her 6-month respiratory checkup, and when he picked her up from school, she was beaming, holding up a drawing of a rocket ship with a stick figure in the window. "That's you, Daddy," she said, her gap-toothed smile bright enough to light up the grey afternoon. "Going to the stars." "We'll get there, baby girl," he whispered, kissing the top of her head. "We'll get there." But the hospital was a madhouse that day, the kind of chaotic energy that makes the hair on your arm stand up. Nurses were running, codes were being called over the intercom, and Julian and Maya were sitting in the waiting area, reading a battered copy of Goodnight Moon, when the double doors of the emergency bay burst open. A gurney came flying through, surrounded by a swarm of doctors, and on it was a girl, pale as a sheet, tubes already hooked up to her small hand hanging limp off the side, and running alongside the gurney, looking like a soul was being ripped out of her chest, was Evelyn Sterling. She wasn't the CEO now, she wasn't the ice queen, she was a mother watching her world end. Her hair was wild, her makeup smeared, screaming at the doctors, "Do something. You said she was stable. You promised me she was stable." Julian pulled Maya close, shielding her eyes, instinct kicking in, but he couldn't stop watching as they wheeled the girl, Sophie, he'd learn later, Evelyn's only child, behind the swinging doors of the ICU, leaving Evelyn collapsing onto the linoleum floor, gasping for air like a fish on a dock. The waiting room went deadly silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, and about 20 minutes later, a nurse came out, looking frazzled, holding a clipboard like a shield. Listen, folks, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I know this is unorthodox, but we have a critical situation. That little girl in there. She's gone into acute renal failure, her body is rejecting the dialysis, and her blood type is incredibly rare, O negative with a specific antigen marker. We are screening the National Registry, but we don't have time. If anyone knows their blood type and is O negative, we are begging for a preliminary screen. Most people looked at their shoes, some shifted uncomfortably, because it's a big ask, giving a part of yourself to a stranger, but Julian sat there, and he felt a tug in his chest, a memory of sitting by Sarah's bedside, begging God for a miracle that never came, bargaining with the universe for just one more day, one more hour. He looked at Maya, who was safe, breathing, alive, and he looked at the closed doors where another parent was living his worst nightmare. I'm O negative, Julian said, standing up, his voice quiet but steady in the hushed room. The nurse looked at him like he was an angel in a janitor's uniform. Sir, are you sure? It's just a screen, but if you match. I know the drill, Julian said, handing Maya her tablet. Baby, sit right here. Daddy has to go help the doctors for a minute, okay? He went back, they drew the blood, and he waited, sitting on the crinkly paper of the exam table, staring at a poster about heart health, wondering if he was crazy, wondering if he should just walk out and take his daughter for ice cream. 40 minutes later, the head surgeon walked in, and he looked like he'd seen a ghost. Mr. Hayes, the doctor said, taking off his glasses, I have been doing this for 20 years, and I have never seen a compatibility match this perfect between two unrelated strangers. You aren't just a match, you're practically a genetic twin for the organ. You could save her life, but I need to be clear. We need the kidney now, tonight. Julian took a deep breath, the weight of the decision settling on him, the recovery time, the lost wages, the pain. But then the door banged open and Evelyn Sterling stood there. She looked wrecked, stripped down to the raw nerves, her eyes red and swollen, and when she saw Julian sitting there, the man she had called incompetent, the man she had stepped over just hours ago, she froze, her hand flying to her mouth as the realization hit her like a freight train. You, she whispered, her voice cracking. It's you. It's me, Julian said, his face impassive, holding the same dignity he had held in the lobby. The doctor looked between them, sensing the tension but too focused on the medicine to care about the history. Mrs. Sterling, Mr. Hayes is a perfect match. He is willing to proceed, but we need to move immediately. Evelyn walked into the room, her legs shaking, and she didn't look like a billionaire. She looked small, she looked terrified, and she looked at Julian with a desperation that was painful to witness. Why? She asked, tears spilling over. After this morning, after what I said to you, why would you do this? Julian stood up, smoothing down his work shirt, and he looked her right in the eye, not with hate, not with anger, but with a profound, bone-deep sadness that only the grieving understand. Because I lost my wife 3 years ago, he said softly, and I know what it's like to stand in a hallway and pray to a God who isn't listening. I know what it's like to have all the love in the world and no way to save the person you love. He took a step closer, and because my daughter is sitting in that waiting room, and I am teaching her that we don't treat people the way they treat us, we treat people the way they need to be treated. Evelyn sobbed, a harsh, guttural sound, and she dropped to her knees, right there on the dirty hospital tile, clutching the hem of his jeans. I will give you anything, she choked out. Money, a house, anything you want, just please, please save my Sophie. Julian reached down and gently pulled her up, his hands rough and calloused against her silk blouse. Get up, Mrs. Sterling. I'm not selling you a kidney. I'm giving it to your daughter. Now let's go get this done before I lose my nerve. They prepped him for surgery, and the last thing Julian remembered before the anesthesia took him under was the image of Sarah's face, smiling at him, whispering that he was doing good, that he was the man she always knew he was. The surgery was a marathon, 5 hours of delicate work, swapping parts of life from one body to another, and while Julian was under, Evelyn sat in the waiting room, but she didn't sit in the VIP suite, she didn't sit with her board members who had rushed over. She sat next to Maya. She watched this little girl, dressed in thrift store clothes with her hair in neat, tight braids, coloring in a coloring book with a focus that blocked out the world, and she saw the hole in the knee of Maya's leggings, she saw the scuff marks on her sneakers, and she felt ashamed so hot it made her nauseous. Is your daddy sick? Maya asked, looking up suddenly, catching Evelyn staring. No, honey, Evelyn said, her voice trembling. Your daddy is, he's a hero, he's saving my little girl. That sounds like him, Maya nodded matter-of-factly, going back to her purple crayon. He fixes things, that's what he does. He says broken things just need a little extra love. Evelyn had to look away because she felt like her heart was breaking open. realizing that she had judged a man by his uniform while he was raising a queen on a pauper's budget. When Julian woke up, the pain was sharp and immediate, a fire in his side that made it hard to breathe, but he was alive, and the nurse told him the transplant was a success, that Sophie's body had accepted the kidney like it was her own. He spent 4 days in the hospital, and every single day, Evelyn was there. She didn't come in with pomp and circumstance. She came in quietly, bringing food, bringing updates on Sophie, sitting in the uncomfortable chair by his bed. But the real reckoning came a week later, after he had been discharged and was back in his tiny, 2-room apartment in the South Ward, trying to manage the pain without strong meds because he had to stay alert for Maya. There was a knock on the door, a tentative, hesitant sound, and when Julian shuffled over to open it, leaning heavily on the wall, he found Evelyn standing in his hallway, looking out of place among the peeling paint and the smell of cabbage from a neighbor's unit. "Can I come in?" she asked, holding a basket of fruit that probably cost more than his monthly grocery budget. "It's not much," Julian said, stepping aside, "but you're welcome." She walked in and her eyes took it all in, the water stains on the ceiling, the small TV, the shrine to Sarah on the mantel with fresh wildflowers in a jar, and he saw her shoulder slump, the weight of his reality hitting her. "I didn't know," she whispered, looking at a stack of overdue medical bills on the counter that Julian hadn't had the energy to hide. "I didn't know it was like this for you." "Why would you?" Julian moved slowly to the couch and sat down with a wince. "You live in the sky, Evelyn. You don't look down at the ground unless you're checking for scuff marks." It was a jab, but she took it, nodding slowly. "I deserve that. I deserved worse." She sat on the coffee table, facing him, ignoring the dust. "Sophie is going home tomorrow. Her color is back. She's laughing again. She asked about the man who gave her the super kidney. She wants to meet you." "I'd like that." Julian smiled, a genuine, tired smile. "She's a fighter." "Julian." Evelyn's voice turned serious, businesslike but softer. "I tried to write you a check. I tried to set up a trust, but I know you. I know you're too proud to take charity, but I cannot. I cannot live in a world where the man who saved my daughter is scrubbing my floors to pay for his wife's funeral debts." "I don't want your money, Evelyn," Julian said firmly. "I did it for the girl." "I know." She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick folder. "Which is why I'm not offering you money. I did some digging, Julian. I pulled your file. I called your old references at Boeing and Lockheed." She opened the folder and spread out blueprints, schematics, designs for a high-efficiency turbine engine that Sterling Global had been trying to crack for 2 years. "You wrote a paper on thermal dynamics in 2018 that predicted the cooling issues we are having with the new prototype," she said, tapping the paper. "You aren't a janitor. You're an engineer who fell through the cracks of a broken system." Julian looked at the papers, feeling a flicker of his old self, the part of him that loved the math, the logic, the stars. "I'm offering you a job," Evelyn said, "head of research and development for the Clean Energy Division, full benefits, full pension, a salary that reflects your worth, not your desperation, and a company scholarship for Maya, to any school she wants to go to, from now until she finishes her PhD." Julian stared at her, his throat tight. "You don't have to do this." "I'm not doing it as a thank you." Evelyn stood up, regaining some of her CEO stature but with a new warmth. "I'm doing it because I was an idiot to have a mind like yours emptying trash cans. I'm doing it because Sterling Global needs you, and because I want to be the kind of leader who sees people, really sees them." She held out her hand, not a handout, but a handshake, an offer of partnership. "So, Mr. Hayes," she smiled, her eyes wet, "are you ready to stop being invisible?"
Julian looked at Evelyn's outstretched hand, and for a moment, the room was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside. It wasn't just a job offer. It was a lifeline, a rope thrown down into the dark well he'd been living in for 3 years. He thought about the nights he'd sat up calculating whether he could afford electricity and groceries in the same week. He thought about Maya wearing shoes that pinched her toes. Because he couldn't buy the next size up until payday. He reached out and took Evelyn's hand. Her grip was firm, warm, human. "I'll take the job," Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. "But on one condition." Evelyn raised an eyebrow, a shadow of her old sharpness returning, but softened. "Name it." "Nobody gets treated like I was treated in that lobby," Julian said, his gaze intense. "If I come back, I want to run a mentorship program. I want to find the other people in your company, the mailroom clerks, the cafeteria workers, the drivers who have skills they aren't using. I want to build a ladder for them." Evelyn smiled, and this time, It reached her eyes. "Deal. You can build whatever ladder you want, Julian. Just help us build better engines first." The transition wasn't seamless. You don't just go from wearing a gray jumpsuit to a tailored suit overnight without people talking. When Julian walked into the R&D department on his first day, the murmurs were loud. People recognized him. "Isn't that the guy who emptied the recycling bins? Did he win the lottery? I heard he saved the boss's kid." But Julian didn't let the whispers get to him. He walked into the conference room for the morning briefing on the turbine project, the one that had been stalled for 6 months due to overheating issues. And he sat at the head of the table. The engineers, a group of young, hungry Ivy League grads, looked at him with skepticism. "All right," Julian said, ignoring the slideshow presentation. "Turn it off. Let's look at the intake manifolds. You're trying to force air compression at a velocity the alloy can't handle. You don't need stronger metal. You need to change the angle of the intake by 4 degrees. Silence. One of the senior engineers, a guy named Rick who used to deliberately drop coffee grounds on the floor, just to watch Julian sweep them up, scoffed. "And where did you get your degree in aerodynamics? Janitor University?" Julian didn't flinch. He picked up a marker and walked to the whiteboard. In 3 minutes, he sketched out a thermal equation that corrected the drag coefficient and solved the heat dispersion problem. He capped the marker and tossed it to Rick. "Caltech, actually," Julian said calmly. "Class of '04, summa cum laude. Now, can we get to work? Or do you want to keep talking about my resume?" By lunch, the skepticism was gone. By the end of the week, the prototype was running at 98% efficiency. Julian Hayes wasn't just back. He was better than he had ever been, fueled by a second chance and a burning desire to prove that dignity has nothing to do with your paycheck. But the real change wasn't in the engineering lab. It was in the culture. Evelyn kept her word. She gave Julian carte blanche to start his program, which he called the Sarah Initiative. After his wife, he started holding open office hours for support staff. He found a security guard who was a coding prodigy and moved him to IT. He found a cafeteria lady who had a master's in marketing from her home country and moved her to branding. And Evelyn? She changed too. The near loss of Sophie had cracked her open, letting the light in. She started learning people's names. She stopped checking her phone when people spoke to her. She started eating lunch in the cafeteria, sometimes sitting across from Julian, where they would talk not about work, but about their daughters. One rainy afternoon, about 6 months later, Julian was in his office, a corner suite with a view of the Seattle skyline, a far cry from the broom closet, when his assistant buzzed him. "Mr. Hayes, Mrs. Sterling is here to see you, and she has a guest." The door opened, and in walked Evelyn, looking softer, happier, and holding the hand of a little girl who looked like a porcelain doll with roses in her cheeks. "Sophie, we were in the neighborhood," Evelyn said, beaming. Sophie insisted we stop by. Sophie let go of her mother's hand and walked right up to Julian's desk. She looked at him with big, serious eyes. "Are you Julian?" "I am," Julian said, crouching down to her level. "It's nice to meet you, Sophie. Mommy says you gave me a piece of yourself so I could stay." Sophie said, her voice small but clear. "She says we're kidney buddies." Julian laughed, a deep, rich sound. "I guess we are, kiddo. Kidney buddies for life." Sophie reached into her small backpack and pulled out a drawing. It was messy, colorful crayon work. It showed a tall man in blue and a little girl in pink, holding hands, with a giant red heart between them. "I made this for you," she said. "Thank you for saving me." Julian took the drawing, his eyes stinging. He looked up at Evelyn, and they shared a look that transcended words, a look of shared trauma, shared healing, and a shared future. "You're welcome, Sophie," Julian whispered. "You take good care of it, okay?" "I will," she promised. That evening, Julian picked up Maya from her new private school. She hopped in the car, looking sharp in her uniform, bubbling with stories about her science class. "Daddy," she shouted, "guess what? We learned about kinetic energy today. It's like when you push something and it keeps going." "That's right, baby," Julian smiled, pulling into traffic. driving toward the new house. They had just bought a nice place with a big yard and a kitchen that smelled like possibility. "It's all about momentum, Daddy," Maya asked, growing quiet. Are we rich now?" Julian looked at her in the rearview mirror. He thought about the bank account that was finally full. He thought about the job that challenged him. He thought about Evelyn and Sophie and the community of people he was lifting up at the company. But then he thought about the drawing in his briefcase and the picture of Sarah he still kept in his wallet. "We have money now, Maya," Julian said softly. "But we were always rich. We had each other. We had love. Money just makes the ride a little smoother, but it doesn't change who's driving the car, okay?" she said, satisfied. "Can we get ice cream?" "You bet." A year later, at the company's annual gala, Evelyn took the stage. She looked out at the sea of faces: investors, employees, media. But this time, she didn't talk about stock prices or quarterly earnings. "We measure success in numbers," she began, her voice ringing clear. "But this year, I learned that the most valuable assets in this company aren't on a spreadsheet. They are the people who unlock the doors, who serve the coffee, who clean the floors. We nearly lost our greatest innovator because I was too blind to look past a uniform. Let that be a lesson to all of us. No one is invisible. No one." She gestured to the side of the stage, where Julian stood in a tuxedo, looking handsome and proud, holding Maya's hand. The crowd erupted in applause, a standing ovation that shook the room. Julian didn't bow. He just nodded, a small acknowledgement of how far he'd come. After the speech, Julian found himself on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. Evelyn joined him, handing him a glass of champagne. "Quite a year," she said, leaning against the railing. "Quite a year," he agreed. "You know," she said, looking at him sideways. "Sophie asked me if you're coming to her birthday party next week. She says a party isn't a party without her kidney buddy." "I wouldn't miss it," Julian said. "Maya has already bought her a gift." "Good." Evelyn smiled, and then she hesitated. "Julian, I never really asked. That day in the lobby, when I humiliated you, why didn't you just quit? Why did you stay?" Julian looked out at the horizon, where the stars were just starting to peek through the city glow. He thought about Sarah. He thought about the promise he made to her on her deathbed to keep going, to never let the world turn him cold. "Because," Julian said, turning to Evelyn, "my wife used to say that dignity isn't something people give you. It's something you keep for yourself. You couldn't take my dignity, Evelyn. You could only show me yours. And I stayed because I had a little girl to feed, and a father does what he has to do." Evelyn nodded, humbled. "Well, I'm glad you did. You saved us, Julian. In more ways than one. We saved each other," he corrected. They stood there in the quiet of the evening, to parents, to survivors, watching the city breathe below them. They were from different worlds, brought together by a tragedy that turned into a miracle. And as Julian looked at the stars, he felt a warmth on his shoulder, like a hand resting there. And he knew Sarah was watching. He knew she was proud, not because he was an executive, not because he was wealthy, but because he had walked through the fire and came out without smelling like smoke. He had kept his heart soft in a hard world. And that, he realized, was the true engineering marvel. So, here's the question I want to leave you with. And I really want you to think about this before you type your answer in the comments. We all walk past people every day: the cashier, the bus driver, the person sweeping the street. We see them, but do we see them? If the roles were reversed, if you were in your darkest hour, who would be the one to save you? The person in the corner office or the person pushing the cart? Think about it. And maybe, just maybe, next time you see someone doing a job you wouldn't want to do, look them in the eye and say thank you. Because you never know. You might be talking to the person who holds the key to your survival. Let me know your thoughts down below. I read every single one. Until next time, stay kind, stay humble, and keep your eyes open. You never know where the next miracle is hiding.